Stefanos.
Steph, you can call me Steph.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this live interview series. And I am so blessed to have one of my favorite relationship educators as the first interview. So before we get kicked off, if you're joining in, this is going to be live on my Facebook wall and also live in the private men's group that about 60 of us are in right now. So it's just a great little group of men. And we'd love for you to join if you're feeling called to do that. So you can do that at christinamcfadden.com/challenge. If you're looking to join in at the last minute, today will be the only one that'll be streamed live. And the rest of them are going to be behind the private Facebook group. So, and if you're tuning in right now, please say hello in the comments and tell us where you're listening in from, and we'll get started. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to introduce my my amazing guest. So Stefanos Sifandos, he is a trained educator and relationship expert with a background in behavioral science. He's passionate about leading people closer to their highest potential, and he helps men and women escape negative patterns and cultivate a positive sense of self, as well as restructuring and reframing their relationships with themselves and their loved ones. And if you want to know more about Steph, you can follow him on Instagram. I will show that, his Instagram handle. And if you want to know more about his programs and his offerings, feel free to visit his website at stefanosifandos.com. So thank you so much for joining.
You're professional with all the links up and all that stuff.
Pew, pew, pew.
There you go. That's so good. And I think I don't know if I broke the sound barrier or something, but I was able to share on my Facebook page whilst I was listening to you and you were talking and all these things were happening, and it's on my Facebook.
Oh, that's awesome. We can do two things at once. That's so good. So the thing that every day we're going to be talking about new topics and kind of like zoning in on you have many zones of genius in relationships. Like you are a prolific speaker about relationships. Right. So there's really not a topic that you haven't covered in the time that I've known you. So if there's a book there should be a book in the works for you. Absolutely. But the thing that I wanted to talk to you about in particular was kind of like the perils of modern relating for men. Especially now. This is a very obviously unique time, not just even like the past year and a half, right? With like a pandemic and feeling like the idea of dating is impossible, but just the sort of modern relating right now for men. Like why have things shifted and become more difficult to connect from a dating and relating standpoint? Like what's going on in the sauce here that becomes so challenging for men to kind of feel like they can really win at dating and relating?
What a big question. Great question. Big question. I think if we go inwards, I think there's a confusion for men in terms of how they're meant to be, how they think they're meant to be, right? Maybe that's a better way to put it. And not only how they think they're meant to be, but how they, can you hear that feedback?
A little bit, but I'll mute myself while you're talking.
Okay, I think it's gone. Okay, cool. So it's this confusion in how they think they're meant to be. So what's ultimately happening is men, and specifically to men now, men are dating, men are going on dates, and they're contorting themselves. They're attempting to guess or be that man that they think or perceive that that person sitting across from them wants them to be. And it isn't necessarily always who they truly want to be. And so we have to ask ourselves, let's keep peeling that back for a moment. Let's ask ourselves, okay, why would a man want to do that? Why would he want to contort himself? Why would he not want to be himself? Is it that he doesn't believe in himself? Is it that his self-worth is low? Is it that he has unresolved issues, trauma, pain, fears? Is it that he has a fear of getting hurt again? Is it that he thinks that society says, hey, you have to have the cars and the money and the status and this, and that he's now wearing all these masks? And it's changing the way that he's being. Now, here's the thing. That's not sustainable because it's not real. And ultimately what will happen eventually is that individual would build resentment. He will build resentment towards himself, but towards that person that he's dating. And if they become partners and long-term partners in whatever capacity, in whatever expression, there's even a greater level of resentment that's projected towards them. And now all of a sudden, what that individual fell for or became attracted to or was endearing to him is no longer endearing. And so now he's angry, or now he's depressed, or now he's withdrawn. And now his partner's saying, well, you weren't withdrawn at the beginning. You were this person then, but you're not this person now. Why have you changed? But has he ever changed? And so when we have these unrealistic expectations that are thrust upon us as individuals, as human beings, so whether that's permeated through the collective consciousness, or whether that's a familial value that we've taken on, or through our peer groups, or through social media, or traditional media, or whatever it may be, that we believe we have to be a particular way when we don't want to, but we force ourselves to be that way, like square peg, round hole, that's not sustainable. And I think what we're seeing in modern day dating in 2021 is the accumulation of probably a number of years of that. And if we go back to, say, the 90s, where a different wave of feminism came through, and by the way, this isn't blaming feminism in any capacity, the feminist movement or the female movement towards greater equity is something that has needed to happen. And as a byproduct, it's also caused a lot of confusion for so many men. Now, what we need to do as men is take some ownership of, okay, who do we want to be, and who are we, and what are we really attracted to? I mean, I've just touched the surface. There's still pornography that we haven't got, like mainstream pornography. There's still the expectation of how and who to be in relationship. There's still family dynamics that play out in our intimate, romantic, sexual partnerships as well. There's so many avenues to this.
So I'm tracking a couple of things that you said. If I'll surmise it in the way that I hear you say it, is that oftentimes when we start dating, there's a distinct difference between kind of like offering up yourself, like kind of a natural unfurling of who you are, right? You don't like want to offer up everything on the first date. Like that is part of the beauty of like getting to know someone. But what men a lot of times do is that they become a caricature of themselves, a caricature of like a masculine archetype or something, and sort of protect themselves from their partner. So that if a relationship starts becoming deeper, they have to, there's a conflict now between like, well, I actually am not showing you who I really am, the full depths of me. And now I resent you because I can't keep up this facade. I can't I can't play this game for much longer. And it's much easier to either sort of like let you go or like make you wrong than to actually sort of acknowledge that I wasn't so attuned with myself to give you more of what you actually wanted. So it's a really sad paradox, right?
Agreed. And what it comes down to is, in this instance, is men not doing their work, right? Men not equilibrating or dealing with and being with their fears. And so if they have a fear of rejection, they're masking that with a false bravado. If they have a fear of abandonment, they're pretending to be someone that doesn't care potentially, but really they do. Now, through our neuroception, through our ability of our nervous systems to just feel our way through the world in an unconscious way, that send these messages to our brain that give us that intuitive hit of something, is that should we move towards something or should we move away? Like, are we attracted to or are we repelled by? That person, that partner, let's just say it's a woman in this sense, particularly women actually have a more attuned, intuitive brain centers, right? And that's an evolutionary thing that has developed over millions or hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. And so let's just say that happens. There's a tear in vulnerability now. There's a tear in openness. And if someone feels that you're not being completely open with them, you're going to hold back a little bit. And so now you've got two people attracting and being in this constricted, fear-based state, unwilling to show themselves, and yet trying to show something that they think the other person would be attracted to because their self-worth is so low. And so we end up playing these ridiculous games that limit us and minimize the potential of that relationship actually flourishing into something really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And I think, one of the things that hinders that, like the idea around being on dating apps, Well, one of them is that they're not really designed for you to meet a partner and like get off the dating app. Like it's a dating app is a business, and the business is to stay on the dating app, right? So part of the business of that is to feel like you're only kind of taking a literal superficial swipe of somebody. And the paradox of choice is amplifying this discontent for all of us, which is making it even harder to drop into vulnerability or into a meaty conversation or into something that doesn't feel very generic. You feel the same way? Do you feel like how the sort of dating app world is kind of construed is like amplifying that problem?
Yeah, you ever been to a restaurant and the menu is about 28 pages long and you're like, what the fuck am I going to do with this?
Yeah, like the Cheesecake Factory or something. You're like, this is a lot.
It's paralysis by overanalysis, right? There's just too much there on the menu. And so that's really no different to dating. We become overwhelmed and now we just become habitual. And so we're stopping at a red light, we're swiping, we're on the toilet, we're swiping. We're not deliberate, we're not intentional, we're not focused. And we know where attention goes, energy flows. We're not really being attentive. We're just looking for those superficial markers. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being physically attracted to someone. That's a very important part of being in relationship, actually. Sexual union is a very important part of the relationship.
Sure, yeah.
And sexual attraction and so forth, physical attraction. But when we do it from that place, we're usually going to be met with that level of depth or shallowness. And so if that's what we want, if all we want is casual sex or one night stands or, fast sex, so to speak, that's cool, but that's what you're going to get. And if that's not what you really want and you're pretending you want that, and in order to run from something or hide from something like a deeper wound or a deeper pain or a fear, or because you're trying to put some pleasure back into your body because you're avoiding a pain, that can be a real problem long term.
Yeah. And so kind of pivoting from this sort of stepping into like a certain role and the certain apathy of dating right now with dating apps, and kind of just also coming off of a year and a half of like not feeling like we've like used that dating muscle and that socialization muscle. Do you feel also that there is this lack of polarity around how men are approaching women? Because, also this past year, there's been a lot of call out culture, and sometimes men's response to that is to play it very safe, like really keep it close to the chest and not give any kind of innuendo that they might be sexually attracted or that they might want to like lead with their sexuality. And again, this seems like one of those paradoxes, because most women actually really thrive when there's this sort of grounded desire coming from a man, but men don't seem to really understand, or some men don't seem to understand the nuance in that. So they would rather play it safe. Seems like it's hurting dating prospects for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And that's really vested in low self-worth. And so what does that mean? That means that men aren't confident enough in themselves to make those choices around leading or approaching or being proactive or being more engaged in that dating process. And there's a fear there. Yeah, so cancel culture is real, call out culture is real, and it's also as real as we make it, right? So at some level, if you as a man can come into yourself and say, hey, this is who I am, and that requires inner work, that requires being self-reflective, that requires maybe working with someone outside of yourself, a therapist, a coach, a men's group, whatever, like to get reflection, because we're relational beings and we can't often see the forest through the trees within our own psyche or our own way of seeing the world. And so that's one of the ways that we grow, one of many ways that we grow. And so we can drop into that heightened state of self-worth, not arrogance, but genuine confidence. We can go up to someone, go up to a woman and say, hey, I really find you attractive and I'd like to get to know you. However you say it, this is one way of a million ways of saying it. And if that woman says thanks but no thanks in whatever way she says it, you can be okay with that. And maybe it may hurt and you can learn and grow from that, but it's not going to stop you from approaching someone. It's not going to stop you from being in your truth, right? And so we're seeing a lot of that right now. And yeah, one of the reasons is because this massive fear of cancel culture, of being called out and being told that you're a pervert, or you're all you want is this, or you're this type of man. And I think that's doing a disservice to intimacy and relating big time. I think we're a little addicted to cancel culture, and I think we're really tough. And I'm generalizing here, right? But we're really tough behind a keyboard, right? And we're keyboard warriors, and it's really easy to go. I don't actually type like this, but I'm proven. I'm type, but F you, you're wrong. But would you say that with that energy and that intention, in front of someone? And that's an example of how we are engaged in this cancel culture and this call-out culture in a very aggressive way. But here's the thing, we wouldn't do that if we're in someone's physical presence. So it may help to start looking at how would we behave if we were in someone's physical presence? How do we want to behave? How do we want to be treated? And taking that approach, letting that feed into our self-worth, letting that feed into how we're choosing to interact and relate with people, I think that can be a more empowering way to realistically break a collective pattern of late of being more isolated. And so, because of the circumstances that we've found that the world has found itself in for the last, say, year and a half. But we have to do something because we're relational beings. Like, we thrive in the context of physical connection and physical intimacy. We need that. And that can't just go away. If that goes away, I think, one of the philosophical conundrums of our time, and that has been for the last, thousands of years, is that question of what makes a human being a human being. And so many, famous philosophers have tried to answer that question in different ways. I don't think it's ever one thing. I think it's multiple things. I think one of those things is our ability to be physically intimate with each other in all the different ways. I think that's one of the ways that being deliberately intimate with each other, not just instinctually intimate, but and being deliberately intimate also includes sex and sexuality, but being deliberate around that, having a very deep awareness around that beyond just a neurological instincts or survival-based instincts. I think that's one of the things that defines being human. And if we pull away from that, I think we're at some level subjugating part of our humanity.
Yeah, you kind of brought up the loneliness. Like, there's such a desire to connect, and there's also a fear, as much as the desire to connect. I think there's also a fear of getting it wrong or being shamed or the wrong making. So these are there's two sides of this piece, which is I don't want to be made to feel wrong because of my desire to connect. And if I do it imperfectly, like how can we like reorient towards imperfect and also not without shaming, and remembering that like men are there's a lot of men that are incredibly lonely. And I'm not talking about like tolerating abusive behavior, but like, can we build a window of tolerance of like imperfect action that men are trying to do? I know that I want to be a part of that world. I know that that's like why I want to serve men, is for them to have a place that they can practice their imperfect action and not feel wronged. Like, this is a calling that I have. And I know that I can hold that space. But I also, the idea of loneliness, especially in this past year, I think the pandemic amplified the loneliness of men, that men are typically very isolated from each other. And like, when this past year, like I'm speaking in generalities, right? Like, women tend to be more resourced in friendship. They rely more on their friendships from an emotional level. They tend to have a wider net of friendships. And then this year, I think for men, made them feel like, oh my gosh, I don't really have close friends that I actually talk about things with. I don't have a woman in my life, or I don't have a lot of people in my life that I have regular contact with, like that I would call on the phone and tell them about my problems. And that's so incredibly heartbreaking. Like, as somebody that's like a bystander watching that, I think of how incredible like that is, because I feel during this year I was like pretty well resourced, as well resourced as a person could be. But for most men, that's not the case.
It's not. And I want to address something that you mentioned that I think is very important. And this is one of the reasons why I deeply honor and revere you as well, is because when you say I can hold that space for men, I absolutely believe you can, and I know you can. And it is something that men need. It's, in fact, I'm going to say it's something that everyone needs. And I mean everyone. And I'm being very absolute when I say that. We all need to be met at some point in our lives with non-judgment, with compassion, with loving presence, with empathetic resonance. But that non-judgment piece is so, so important. And you're right. What the last year and a half has done is amplified that sense of isolation and loneliness for men. It never used to be that way. We've evolved, and I mean evolved, from being humanoids to being Homo sapiens as we are today in this modern culture through tribe, through being with each other, particularly men. Men's identity was forged with the man next to him and the man next to him. We were responsible for extending the perimeter and hunting and being out in the wild and relying on each other to survive. Being in a brotherhood, whether it was 2 men, 3 men, 4 men, 5 men, whatever. Our value to the tribe or to society, however big or small that was through our contribution. Mm-hmm. Now, when we're isolated, yes, we're contributing to society, but it appears to be, particularly in this modern Western socioeconomic model, it seems to be more of an individualized endeavor, right? And again, this is a very complex conversation, but mm-hmm. we're creating, we're serving for most of us, yet it doesn't feel like we're sort of in it together. We're doing things in silos. Mm-hmm. You know, I read once, like, we move from one container to another, whether it's our small apartment to our car, or the train to our office cubicle, to back to the train, back to the small apartment, and we're on repeat right now. That's not my reality, and that's not everyone's reality. Mm-hmm. But for so many people, that is their reality. Yeah. And you're right. They're realizing at a very visceral level, fuck, I'm really isolated. I'm really alone. And you know what? Watching porn, watching TV, doing the VR thing, it's like, it's not really serving me anymore. I need something more. I need something substantial. That's us being called back to our ancient roots. We need more of that.
That's so true. I think, you know, sometimes the antidote, like, is, even if we're talking about dating and relating and we're talking about heterosexual relationships, the antidote isn't necessarily from the feminine side. Like, the antidote is like sometimes building the deeper connection with yourself and building deeper brotherhood with, because the brotherhood keeps you grounded in your purpose and grounded in your work. And like learning how to rely on other men to be held accountable, and not rely, if you have a partner, that she's like the only person that you like emotionally like relate to or regulate to, because that tends to be the case for, you know, a lot of men, that their best friend is their partner, and their partner is exhausted, right? Like you need friends. Please find some friends. And I value the idea so much of having deep brotherhood to like elevate you. And I know that's something that's so important to you. Like, you can see that in all of your posts. You have like deep friendships that you do like emotional work with, but also physical work with. You really feel like you're doing something greater than like at surface level.
I can't, there's something that I'm a founder of and I'm a part of that I can't speak to too much now with respect to men's work, but the intention is to blow the top off this thing, like really blow the top off this thing. And what you just said, that I can't express to you how important men's work is, not only for men, but for all of humanity. And I'm not saying that from an egoic, arrogant place. Equally as important is women's work, and equally as important is that sacred union-based work as well, and intimate relationship and intimate relating as well. It's all, quote unquote, equally important. For all the cancel culture out there, we're not missing anyone out unless you don't identify as human. Like, human work is really important. So this is where we are. We're at the precipice of something really different and something really new right now. And so, new meaning that we've had a lot of disparity, a lot of disconnection, a lot of isolation. And I think one of the things that has enhanced that is the false perception of being so connected via digital devices. And then when for whatever reason, our physical connection has been taken away from us, we're realizing that the physical devices are only getting us so far, and that we really crave human intimacy. And part of that, specifically for, while we're talking about men's work, specifically for men, is being in the presence of other men, where these men can challenge us, these men can call us forward, can ask us to be a better version of ourselves, can support us, where we can have fun with. Men that will say, maybe you need to look at that a little differently, or nope, I'm calling you out on your bullshit. I'm not a big fan of the word call out, but whatever, like people get the term, right? So there's this opportunity that we have, and if we don't seize this opportunity now, I'm not going to say it's never going to happen again, or it's going to be too late, or any of that, but it's just a really ripe time for us to do this. But that means we've got to get really uncomfortable, because one of the biggest issues that I am faced with when I'm in men's work and I'm working with men, talking to men, large groups, individuals, whatever it may be, it's what we've been speaking about. I don't have a support system of other males in my life. I would really love that, and I don't have any of that. That's the number one issue.
Yep. Yeah, I did so much like research this year talking to men around dating and relating. And one of the thematics that kept coming up was, I'm not like other men, which was an interesting thing to say. And I had an interpretation, maybe you have a different interpretation. I heard two things in that. I heard one was that I don't have actually anybody that I think I can emotionally relate to, right? Or I think that I don't want to be associated with what is culturally like men right now. I don't believe that I fit into that mold of like what the generic man is, or what is he perceived to be. And so I won't associate. And so I won't at all relate to what they stand for. So either scenario is like loneliness, right? Yeah. I don't relate, and therefore I don't connect. And I just kind of keep closing the loop on that.
What does the generic man look like in today's world?
I think that there's a perception that, I think from their perspective, right, is like a guy that's not as emotionally available, emotionally attuned, like a bro, I think that when guys were talking about other men, when they're saying I'm not like other guys, it's like they weren't resonating with like the kind of bro mentality where everything was sort of superficial, emotionally superficial.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's definitely a movement because for me, I just see it as a human thing. We have an emotional body and an emotional being, right? And just to very much simplify this, and we all have access to that. And I think men need to have access to that as well. We have to have access to appropriate emoting at various times under certain conditions to elicit a healthy interaction with another human being, but to also help us grow. If we suppress any parts of ourselves, we're not feeling whole in the world, and we're feeling fractured and fragmented. And they're very undesirable places to be and very uncomfortable. And I'm not against being uncomfortable, but I think that's ignorantly uncomfortable, right? And not only that, it's a discomfort that is not the quote unquote right type of discomfort. But I'm definitely seeing a movement where men are becoming more connected to feeling and sensation in the body, and expressing and emoting and thinking about their feelings, but also feeling their feelings, right? And I think there's more of that that's happening. I think that's a healthy thing. Where I don't think would be healthy, nor do I think would be attractive to the feminine or to females, is a man that is emotionally leaky. A man that has sovereignty and agency and control per se over his emotions. I don't think that level of emoting is healthy. In fact, there's a level of codependence in that, which really is not attractive, unless of course you're in codependence as well. But then you're in both parties are in an unhealthy dynamic, and I think that's not really healthy in anyone. And so it's working through that stuff, which I think is important.
I've met a lot of men that that were very emotionally available to women, but they were not emotionally available to other
Yep.
men. And I think they associate that with a certain level of danger, like
Well, yeah,
emotional danger.
yeah, there's more than likely in that scenario, and I've encountered a lot of that, is a masculine wound. So it's a father wound, or I can't
Yeah.
trust men, or men have
Mhm.
abused me in various ways, or I've been bullied by other boys, men, etc. So therefore, all men are dangerous, and I'll find safety in the mother archetype, or the feminine, or females, or love and intimacy in that way. And so that can happen sometimes as well.
Yeah, I think when they were saying I'm not like other men, I think that what they were might be closer is that like I don't trust men. I don't trust other men. I don't trust other men to hold my emotional range. I don't trust other men to like reciprocate that. Yeah, and this is why, creating groups like you're doing, like I'm doing, are changing that narrative because most of us, like, or most men, have not been initiated into their masculinity and towards being a man, right? So that's like anthropologically you can track that, maybe like from very long ago, where there was initiation processes in every culture of you're getting into a certain point, and in order for you to sort of be accepted into the sort of man tribe, you'll complete certain tasks, or you'll do certain things, and then you'll kind of like earn this masculine behavior, be this kind of person. Do you feel like that is playing out in these men's groups as well? Like it's kind of reframing the idea of this initiation process.
Well, I think there are many men that are roaming this earth that are not initiated. And they're not initiated into their adulthood or into their own sense of being a man or masculinity. I'm finding there are men, so many men that are coming to me that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s that don't feel initiated because they don't feel that they're part of a tribe, right? They feel very alone and isolated. And that's part of the uninitiated man, is the man that is isolated.
Like the lone wolf guy, the lone
Yes.
wolf. Yeah.
Correct, right? And so there's this necessity for initiation, and it can be dressed up in different ways. And ultimately, I'm a big believer in some of the ancient practices and the ancient ways of initiation, right? And bringing that into modernity. And in much of the men's work that I do, particularly the in-person stuff, I'll take men through rites of passage where they're reborn into a new version of themselves. They're reborn into this mature masculine man, which many of us don't have that effective, clean, necessary, cultural, connected rite of passage. We finish high school, or we're allowed to drink, or we get our driver's license. And these are initiatory rites of passage, but they're not deliberate, they're not intentional, they're vague. They don't really symbolize a sense of, well, now what do I do with that? Well, now I can drink. Okay, so now I'll just go drink a lot of alcohol. And what does that even mean? Or some men are like, oh, I can drink, so what? I don't even like alcohol. It doesn't mean anything. It's lacking meaning. Symbolism, the oldest language that we have access to, is not deeply present in the life or the transitional life of boy to man, because there is no initiatory practice that takes them through that can give them a sense of worthiness, a sense of confidence in their own selves, a sense of, oh, I can overcome this challenge and I can be met by other healthy men upon my return, or challenges, I should say. We're lacking that. We're lacking that bond and connection. 50+%, let's be honest, probably 60+% of families are somewhat broken, where the male role model, the father figure, is absent in a boy's life.
Right.
And so, and not only that, that boy doesn't really have, in most cases, doesn't have an uncle or uncles or older brothers or other men that are healthy in their structure and healthy in their posture that can guide him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a big thing that we're missing in terms of men's work.
Yeah. And kind of extending that idea, because you were talking about initiation practices. I have like sort of witnessed and observed this with men that I find that are really towing the line of like what healthy looks like. And it's developing certain rituals during your day, with physical rituals, like practices on a daily basis that reinforce the work that you're doing, you know, that it doesn't always stay like this mental game, that it's like this, it's the body practice, it's the mind practice, it's the connecting practices, it's this kind of mind over matter practices that are so, I think, important to men and women, but I think in particular to men, to remember that like you're on a path of purpose. And those things are like building those muscles that you need to sort of stay disciplined and connected to what you're wanting to do. Because the man that's adrift without purpose often feels like they're very fluid in their life, and that they're not really building a grounded sense of self with practices and rituals. I don't know if you feel like for you, that's something that you probably focus a lot on as well, like a daily practice and these atomic habits.
Yeah, I have multiple daily practices that keep me not only grounded but also connected to who I am and who I want to be as well. Some of them are, there's some stillness practice in there, some breath practice, movement practice. I mean, I like to read as well, and just being in space. I like to just look out to the expansive sky or whatever. That can be really useful for me if I can create the space for that as well. But yeah, those grounding practices are really important for me. Even waking up and drinking 800 milliliters to a liter of water every day is part of that grounding practice, right? Like, that's really important for me to hydrate my body and just ground into, okay, where's my day going now? What am I here to do? How am I here to serve? How do I want to feel today? Even just the power of query and asking ourselves some questions can be really important as well.
Yeah. And so bringing that maybe back to bringing all of the stuff that we talked about back to dating, which is like building healthy masculine, like family or brotherhood around you, and that accountability and rituals and initiation practices, how that actually will transform your dating life, because now you have this foundation from which to go out into the world that doesn't feel that you're ungrounded anymore. I think that's really the thing that women feel. And Bailey had mentioned, you know, that in some of these comments, men doing the work is the sexiest thing. And women really love when they sense a man's groundedness. Like that's when they can feel safe. Like safety for a woman is like, you're not scary to me. Your sexuality is not scary to me. Your intensity is not scary to me if I feel that you're really grounded to yourself. And all of that work kind of comes back to like when you're trying to meet somebody romantically. That's such a turn on for women.
Yeah, agreed. I'm a massive proponent of ritual and practice and self-discipline, particularly in the physical, because it's so accessible and it's a fantastic starting point, and it gives us access to the mind and the emotional body and the spiritual self and all of that. And what that also symbolizes, a man that is disciplined in his practices symbolizes confidence and symbolizes an ability to be tough and resilient when needed, an ability to be self-reliant and also self-reflective. And so it's attractive because that man is showing up for himself. And if he can show up for himself, again, there's a fine line, obviously, because that man can be somewhat narcissistic in showing up for himself as well, right? Most of the time, most people are going to be able to really notice that. Not always, of course, because of our own vantage point that we take, or our own wounds, or the way that we put our glasses on and so forth. But for the most part, it's a really important aspect of relating. And when we're in self-care, we're going to have a greater capacity to care for others, generally speaking.
Yeah. Are there any other tips that you would love to give men that will help them in like modern relating, so that they can understand what they can do maybe from an immediate standpoint? Like what's a tactical thing that I can do to make sure that I'm leading with the right energy in this world that feels very superficial and not really, and nobody's really choosing anything? Like what's something that they can do as a right now practice that you would recommend?
If they're in relationship, or if they're dating,
Maybe
or
if
if
they're wanting to date and they're wanting to call in the right kind of woman into their life.
Well, firstly, create space. So if you're working 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're not you're not really going to have time and space for an intimate relationship. That requires effort and intention and space, right? And so if you're one of those men that you're clear that you want to be in a relationship, yet you're also stuck in this routine where you don't have space for a relationship, something's going to give. And that literally may look like, pockets of your week where you're actually allocating space to engage in self-care, not do much at all. Instead of being in this directional energy, you're more in this creative energy. And you're setting an intention of, hey, I'm creating space for a partnership. I'm creating space for love and sex and connection and intimacy. And I'm going to actually do that. That can be a real tangible thing that you can do. If you're using dating online dating apps, most people do, not everyone does, but if you are using online dating apps, get really diligent and very deliberate with what you want your profile to say. Yeah. Take the time to write the profile. Take the time to choose your pictures. Take the time with what image you want to present. Not an artificial image of you, but the true image of you and what that would look like and really feel like. Start there. That's really important. If you're not on dating apps and you're meeting people, be proactive in approaching people. Be proactive in approaching women. It can be a very healthy thing. Be proactive in saying, hey, I'd like to go on a date with you, or hey, I want to get to know you, or whatever it may be. Proactivity is really attractive because it's confidence, right? And again, symbolically, confidence means so much, not only from an unconscious biological perspective, but also from this person seems to be very authentic and real, and that is also safe. That's important as well. And again, if you're dating and you're sharing with people, share honestly with that person. You don't have to throw at them the kitchen sink the first day you meet them or the first date that you go on, but just answer questions honestly and ask really interesting questions as well. Don't just sit there and talk about yourself. Actually get to know the person that you're with. But the only way you can ask those really quality questions is to know yourself and what you want and what you're willing to give. So again, come back, ipso facto, do your inner work to get to know yourself.
Yeah. I love that. I love, I speak to a lot of guys and I go on these really lackluster dates or, nothing's really going well. I'm like, well, you are an active participant in creating conversation. So I can talk to anybody and go deep because I have that capacity within myself. And if they're not able to meet you there, then that's one thing. But I think as a man, as someone, that's masculine, you want to think about leading the date too. Like you're the one that's sort of leading the conversation and leading the date, and let's see what unfolds. So I think sometimes men might take a little more of a passive approach to letting conversation fall stagnant or not keeping up their side of the conversation. I would invite men to sort of lead in that space, invite them to do something, take the first action to continue the conversation. You feel this similarly? Yeah.
Yep, be proactive, very important.
Yeah.
Be proactive, be directional, yes. But then ensure that that's the type of woman you want in your life as well. That is the not the opposite of that, but that complements your directionality. It doesn't mean that you'll never be creative, you'll only be directional and you're energetic. But if that's your dominant energetic, then you want to ensure that you're attracting sexually and relationally someone that is also very comfortable in their creative energetic that matches that in a complementary way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I love this. Well, I know that you have a hard stop in a few minutes, so I want to take a moment. We had a lot of great people were thumbs upping a lot of things that we were saying. So I'm so grateful for everyone that is joining in on this conversation. Just a reminder that we'll be going live only in the private Facebook group for men from here on out. But I wanted you to get a taste of some of the conversations that we're going to be having inside of this group. And I wanted you to know who Steph Sifandos was because he's an amazing educator for relationships and polarity and dynamics and brotherhood and crafting the kind of love that you want in your life. He's not just somebody that speaks about it philosophically. He shows his active participation in his own life and his own process. So I love watching him on Instagram. And you can connect more with him on Instagram at Stefanos.com. That's his Instagram. This is his website. Sorry. Stefanos.com. And do you have anything that you'd like to tell the audience about? I'd love for you to let them know another way that they can reach you, or do you have anything else going on that you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. So just Instagram's great at Stefanos Sifandos, and my website it's stefanosifandos.com. But my wife and I, Christine, we have an amazing relationship weekend coming up June the 11th to June the 13th. It's a virtual weekend. Starts Friday afternoon, evening, and then Saturday day, Sunday day, and it's all about cultivating healthy relationships, how to be in healthy relationships. It's going to be very hands-on and experiential for couples and for singles, and definitely suggest you have a look at that. And you can have a look at that at, I think it's christinehassler.com/relationship retreat.
Yes, yes, and talk about power couple. Christine is also a powerhouse in relationships, and her work is amazing, and the combined efforts of both of you is just like exponential. So yes, please at the end of this we'll find the URL and post that and the links beneath the talk so people can know more about that. Well, thank you so much to everyone that viewed and commented and watched. I deeply appreciate it. And please reach out if you have any questions, and I'm happy to support in any way. And thank you once again to Steph for coming on and speaking about modern relating and some of the paradoxes of the masculine right now in the world of dating and relating. So thank you so much. All right. See you later. Bye, everyone.
Bye.